Hello, friends. This is Tom Swiss with you once again here. Today is October 31st. It is the evening of Samhain, Halloween to a lot of folks out there. But what I'd like to talk with you about this evening is the general neo pagan concept of Samhain. And being that the Zen Pagan is sort of my thing, I'm going to try and talk about that from a little bit of a Buddhist perspective. That's why I'm sitting here in front of my Jizo or Kishtagarba. Please pardon my absolutely horrible pronunciation of any time I try to talk about Sanskrit. The Bodhisattva of the Earth, who you may have heard me speak about or seen me write about before. And Bodhidharma, the legendary founder of Zen, who quite likely did not actually exist, but we won't let that stop us from thinking about his stories. Everybody knows about the four classical elements: earth, air, fire, water. In the Western esoteric tradition, the idea is that there's a fifth element of spirit that kind of descends into this gross matter of the other four elements. And when we talk about the Samhain season, we often talk about there being a veil between this world and a spirit world that's growing thinner this time of year. But there is a tradition, a Japanese tradition of five elements also, which is a little bit different. It has its roots in some Buddhist teachings from China and India, but as far as I can tell, it seems to be a uniquely Japanese thing. The Godai, which means the five big things, or the five big ones, I suppose we might translate it as. In this system, the fifth element is not spirit, but is void or emptiness. Ku is the way that character is pronounced. Now, this is different than the five elements that you may have heard of in Chinese medicine, especially if you've come to me for a shiatsu acupressure session. I talk about five elements. But that's a completely different setup. The Wu Xing are not thought of as elements in the sense of like constituents of matter. The Wu Xing is a cycle of five things: water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. They're a cycle that things go around, the different phases or processes of a cycle that living systems go through: storage and generation, growth, blossoming, stability, and then decline and dissolution. We're getting into the metal season now, fall, and then moving into winter. We're moving into the season of water, of storage, before we come back out in spring with that new growth there. So that's a topic for another time. But if you hear me talk about five elements in one context, five elements in a different context, they're different contexts. So please don't be too baffled by that. Now, this character Ku that we talk about in the Japanese five elements, another way of reading that is kara, as in karate, empty hand. And that refers both to the fact that the practitioner's hand is empty of any weapon, but also it's a reference to this kind of spiritual esoteric idea of emptiness. It's also a pun on a different character which reads kara, which means Chinese. That again could be a whole different tangent, which we won't talk about right now. But anyway, so this idea of emptiness, this character ku or kara, it's kind of, it's near and dear to my heart. This is where I live, right, as a karate guy. One of the most famous discussions of this Japanese system of five elements is the Book of Five Rings, the samurai Miyamoto Musashi's book, Gorin no Sho. He has a chapter there on void, in which he writes, "By knowing things that exist, you can know that which does not exist. That is the void. In the void is virtue and no evil. Wisdom has existence, principle has existence, the way has existence, spirit is nothingness." Of course, he wrote that in Japanese. That's the Victor Harris translation that I'm quoting there. This emptiness, if I say something is empty, we kind of think, oh, it's empty, it's missing something, right, in our conception. But this idea of emptiness does not indicate that there's something missing or there's something deficient. The way we talk about, oh, my gas tank is empty, or oh my God, my beer glass is empty. It's a tragedy, right? What things are empty of in this sort of thought is they're empty of having an individual, stable, separate self nature. Uh, the way Buddhists often talk about this is they say things mutually arise or are mutually dependent. Thich Nhat Hanh, the contemporary Zen teacher, often talks about interbeing. It's another way of talking about that same idea there. Now, a lot of people, if they think about Buddhism and the idea of the afterlife and such, they think that Buddhists believe in reincarnation. Uh, Talking about a really naive idea of reincarnation here. The idea that there's like this sort of immortal spirit or soul that exists somehow in the body or in conjunction with the body, and that when the body dies, this sort of abandons the body, like like a pilot jumping out of a plane, and maybe goes to the spirit world for a while and then comes back to another body again, like that pilot. He jumps out of his plane, he goes back to base for a while, hangs out with his buddies, and then he gets assigned another plane. Um, Wicca probably absorbed this idea of reincarnation from Gerald Gardner's time in Ceylon. He was exposed to Theravada Buddhism there, and it seems that this is where he might have picked up the idea of reincarnation. Of course, he encountered it again later on in spiritualism, which again had picked that. I'm sorry, not in spiritualism, but in Theosophy, which had picked that up from the Buddhists and the Hindus from India and Ceylon. But the Buddha's teaching is a little bit more complicated than that, as far as I can interpret it. Right? I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but I read a little bit. Certainly, many Buddhists, if we talk about Buddhism as a social, phenomenon, certainly many Buddhists do believe in that sort of naive idea of reincarnation. And the Buddha and many leading Buddhist teachers have referenced stories about reincarnation over the years. But some people say that those references are more like or references to metaphors or fables, or they might be speaking in kind of terms that the common people understand. The thing about Buddhism that sometimes gets lost in the West, in the West we're very seeped in the Christian tradition, and the whole point of most mainstream Christian traditions is supernaturalism, right? That God exists and you're going to get to the afterlife if you have the right beliefs and or do the right things. Faith versus works, a whole dispute within Christianity. But the whole point of the thing is find eternal life in Jesus, right? It's all about this future life. Not that every Christian believes that, but this is kind of the point of mainstream Christianity, right? There's certainly enough diversity in Christianity that I don't want to say everybody believes that, but that is certainly the point of mainstream Christianity as we encounter it in our culture. Buddha, he was doing something a little bit different. His focus was on ending suffering in this life. And if he was teaching people who had a certain belief about the afterlife or about deities or whatever, I think he would have made use of those beliefs. He wouldn't have contradicted them because they weren't relevant to what he was talking about. He would have used them. So I think the fact that the Buddha or leading Buddhist teachers make reference to stories about reincarnation, we shouldn't take from that the idea that they believe in reincarnation. In Thich Nhat Hanh's novelization of the Buddha's life, Old Path, White Clouds, every time the Buddha is talking about reincarnation, he's talking with kids. He's like using that as a teaching story to children. I am not enough of a Buddhist scholar to say how accurate that characterization is, that every time the Buddha is recorded in the Pali Sutra talking about reincarnation, we should say he was talking to kids. But I think that puts an interesting framework around it if we think about it in that sort of framing there, because a fundamental, and this I think is I can say without fear of contradiction from Buddhist scholars, one of the fundamental ideas of Buddhism is anatman or anatta, depending whether you're talking about the Sanskrit or the Pali. Again, please pardon my hideous pronunciation. It is the curse of the autodidact. No self. It's the idea of emptiness as applied to the human person. So Buddhism teaches that karma And karma is the cause and effect chain of our actions. It was, oh yeah, that goes on after you die, man. The fact that you die, the shit that you stirred up still keeps swirling around the bowl, okay? you know, but an Atman is rather at odds with this naive model of reincarnation. The idea that, okay, well, there's this self that jumps out of the body and then ends up in another body later on. That's not what the Buddha was talking about. Now, this doesn't mean that there's nothing there. It kind of means the opposite. Everything is there. If there's no self, what's there? What's there is everything. The Indian mystic Kabir put this. I come back to this a lot. This is a really beautiful line. It says, all know that the drop merges into the ocean, but few know that the ocean merges into the drop. Let's think about that, right? So, the idea is that this emptiness, it's not an extinction, it's an expansion. So what if this time of year when we're talking about a veil between the worlds growing thinner and thinner, right? What if we thought about that not as a veil between our physical reality and some spirit world where things are made out of some other type of more rarefied substance which is not subject to the usual physical laws? But what if we thought of it as the boundary between our sort of naive view of reality where form is form and emptiness is emptiness, and on the other side this view where form is emptiness and emptiness is form, as the Heart Sutra puts it. So, maybe it's a good time of year now as the leaves fall from the trees and show us their bones and the space in between their branches, and this time when the energy is drawing in. What do we do this year? One of our central rituals is to carve a pumpkin, right? And so what do? We take this pumpkin, which is full, and we empty it out. We hollow it out. We make use of the space inside. It's a very Taoist concept right there. There's a line in the Tao Te Ching about how it's the space inside of the bowl or the cup, or the space inside of the hub of the wheel where the axle goes, that makes it of use. So I think it's interesting that we do that all the time with our seasonal decorations. So maybe this is a good time to consider the freedom of emptiness as we move into the fall season. So that's my little Samhain rant here. And as we go into the evening of Samhain, in our last video I talked a little bit about the ancestor shrine that I had set up here in this room. And so we're going to do a little offering. So moving kind of very far out of the Buddhist perspective we were just talking about here, we're going to have some whiskey. This is Jim Beam Rye, pre-prohibition style. And the reason I have selected this is because one of my father's favorite cocktails was Rock and Rye. It was a rye whiskey with rock candy. So we're going to put a little bit of this out for the ancestors. There we are. And I don't know, I guess Muddy the dog there must be seeing the ancestors coming. He's letting us know. I don't know. Take that for what you will. So thank you, friends, for joining me for a moment this Samhain. I wish you a blessed Samhain season in whatever way you are choosing to take it, as Halloween or as the time of the thinning veil. And we'll see you next time.